Hello guys, I hope everybody is doing well. In this video, I would like to address this interview that came out on Sky News and some of the things that were said by the Chief of the Defense of Intelligence of Ukraine. And I also want to begin answering this question of, or this excuse or justification or argument that everything that has happened is purely Russia's fault, that all the war crimes are justified, that hiding behind innocent civilians' backs in Azovstal is justified, that Nazism is justified in Ukraine because Russia invaded Ukraine and that's all that matters. And this kind of attitude. So I want to begin to answer this question and kind of give people I'm not necessarily here to convince people that Russia, some white hat, is gonna save the world sort of thing, and there's gonna be people that are like that. They think Russia's like some Putin's some angel and things like that, or that even China is some angel, and there's gonna be people who, I guess, take that point of view. That's not where I'm at, but I do want to. All I want to do is bring people to the kind of like neutral and just make people question and see the situation as way more gray than what it actually is. And first of all, I just want to quickly touch on this. My condolences go out to what happened in America with the recent shooting. But I have to show you guys this. So this is the manifesto. I think this is the picture of the shooter in America, in Buffalo. And you can see the symbol here. This is the black sun symbol. And that's the supposed manifesto. And he is compared to, of course, the Ukrainian soldiers. And this symbol pops up everywhere. This is from the BBC. I showed a video from Sky News. The Buy Me a Fighter Jet plane, it's here. This is not just a regular Nazi symbol, by the way. This is the esoteric Nazi symbol that worships Hitler as a deity. So any kind of justification of this symbol, I believe, is just cope by people who want to ignore the facts of it. And Azov as well. So the Azov battalion also takes on this symbol here, as well as this one, which is from the SS. So I just want to quickly show you guys that it's a very sad incident, and my opinion on racism is it's really stupid. It's the lowest common denominator of intelligence, so definitely down there. But it's a fact of life, unfortunately. And while we have stupid people, we're gonna have racism on both sides. I'm not just saying it's only white. I'm not one of those people that thinks it's just white people doing it. Racism is everywhere, and it's dumb. But getting back to Ukraine, and this video came out by the intelligence chief. You guys can watch the video itself, but I'll make the points that he says, and he makes a few points. And his prediction is, first of all, that there's going to be a decisive battle in the second part of August, and that the combat actions are going to be finished by the end of the year. And the other point that he makes is that he believes that there's going to be a regime change in Russia, that Putin is going to be ousted, and supposedly he's going to be replaced by someone who's going to come along and make Russia retreat and end the war, and basically that's going to be it. Now, for the sake of the Ukrainian army, I hope that's not what they actually believe. I hope this is some kind of propaganda for Western audiences, because the chance of this happening is very, 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 very slim. And I'll explain why, because I'll try to explain this position that Russia has, why this war is happening, and why Russia it was almost inevitable. And I think that it's my theory that maybe if the Ukrainians didn't understand, or if the Ukrainians were tricked into it, definitely NATO, the West, and America understood the situation a lot more than what we're telling the people. That they understood that Russia almost had no choice but to do what they did, and that this whole idea of bleeding Russia, there's actually a very important reason for that. But first, let's get to this this argument, I guess, that the war is gonna end, it's gonna be finished by the end of the year. Well, if you understand why Russia had this war, then you will realize that, or come to the conclusion that Russia's going to keep this war going as long as it takes. Even if Ukraine pushes the Russians to the border of Ukraine, they would have to go into Moscow, basically. Not just Moscow, they would have to, conquer Russia to stop this war, to stop Russia from continuing this war in some way, shape, or form. Even if Russia's army gets completely decimated, okay, the unlikely outcome that happens, even with all the failures, let's say, on Russia's side. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of every battle or of every strategy of the corruption that is definitely present in Russia as well, and how many nukes they have filled with vodka instead of rocket fuel or any of that kind of stuff. That could very well be true to a certain extent, but I think Russia does have enough to overcome Ukraine eventually, and they'll take all the time they need either to continue attacking Ukraine with soldiers, or at the very least to continue rocketing them. And again, people say that, Russia's going to run out of rockets, they're not going to build any new rockets. Well, what, they're never going to build another rocket for the rest of Russian history? Or what's the timeline? Like, Russia has been in some very drawn out conflicts. America spent 20 years in Afghanistan, and everybody is expecting, they're still in Iraq and all these other places. So everyone is expecting Russia to just back off from a situation that is way more important to them than, say, Iraq is to Australia or even to America. It's very doubtful. Now, addressing the other point that he makes about Putin being ill, I have no idea. Putin is a human being. He can very well, die like anyone else can. But this idea that Putin is going to be replaced by somebody that is less militarily aggressive is, I think, very, very false. If anything, Putin will be replaced by someone who's more aggressive and is going to extend the war. And there's a lot of people in Russia right now calling for full mobilization. So the way the conscription in Russia works is everyone does like a year or two. So most of the Russian citizens are already militarily trained to a certain extent. So if you have full mobilization, it means you're basically calling everyone, or as many people as you need, who have previously been through the training to come and fight. And you're pulling people out from all these. Remember, Russia is in a lot of different countries. It's in Syria. Russia is not to the extent that America is, but it's also has certain alliances with countries that it helps out. Iran, Syria. And these alliances go way back, and I don't understand half of them because, again, I'm not Russian. I don't know a lot of this history, but needless to say, Russia does tend to try to help its allies out. And this is where this idea of bleeding Russia really comes into play. And I believe this whole idea of bleeding Russia isn't to do what, that has to be done to save Ukraine, which would be to, attack Moscow. That's the only thing that would save Ukraine, is a full-scale kind of World War III NATO scenario. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is all designed to distract Russia from getting in the way of all these other things all these other interests that America has, that NATO has, all the involvement in the Middle East, and all of these conflicts, with Turkey. And so I think Finland is now trying to join NATO, and Turkey's just recently come out and they said, well, we don't like Finland, we don't like Sweden because they support the Kurds, and Sweden, I think, has a lot of Syrian refugees, and Syrians, more or less, they really like Russians. especially from the Syrians that I've talked about. And Russia is supporting the Syrian government, the official Syrian government. But again, I don't know enough about it, and you're going to have to look into those individual situations yourself, because all those situations are, if not just as complicated, probably more complicated than Ukraine is. You know, the Middle East is a whole other clusterfuck of cultures and clans and all these like histories and grievances going back throughout history. So I'll let you guys research that and see which side of the equation you fall into. But nevertheless, it is a fact that, you know, America has these, and NATO has these interests. They've been invading countries, you know, for forever, like since World War II ended. They've been invading countries. So also this idea that NATO is some peaceful, or the NATO countries are all peaceful and they're not going to harm Russia, it's insane. It's not based in any sort of reality whatsoever. But people still say that kind of stuff, even for just literally America just left Afghanistan after 20 years, like literally now, and they left it by bombing, I think, a bus full of kids, and who knows what else. We don't know half the things they did there. So this idea that NATO isn't a threat to Russia is just insane. But let's get into just some geographical facts that I want to touch upon. So hopefully this picture is good enough to explain this. And this is the Northern European Plain, or the Great European Plain. And in essence, what this is somewhere about halfway between Poland, which is Poland right here. This is Belarus, this is Ukraine, this is Russia over here. And somewhere between halfway in Poland, there is a very narrow corridor that you can send armies through. But once you get past this corridor, it opens up into this vast, very undefensible plain. Mostly flat land, very easy to transverse, to drive tanks through, whatever you want. There is barely any natural defense, well, pretty much no natural defenses between the border of Ukraine, which is huge, and the capital cities of Russia, Moscow and all this kind of stuff. So there's no natural defenses here. And the reason for that is that the way the Russian Empire, the way Moscow was set up, is it was never meant to be defended itself. So Moscow and the capital cities are in the middle of nowhere. You know, there's no natural defenses around them. And the idea was they would defend the extended borders. So wherever the Russian Empire would spread to, that's the borders where they would defend. So they would defend, I think, Russia. Around World War II, they had half of Poland and even half of Germany, you know, when the Soviet Union was there. But before then, it was quite large. It was definitely most of Ukraine, if not all of it. I think it would have like come around here. So this was the contested area of Galatia, which was another interesting thing to talk about. And that's going to come into play between Poland and Ukraine at some point, I think. So that was the idea, is that Russia would defend things by having this buffer of what are now other countries. Latvia, Estonia as well, this was all part of it. And this was actually, I think, somewhere around here was part of Finland, and Russia took part of Finland, which is another interesting part of history to talk about. But again, this is all complicated. This is welcome to Europe. This is all complicated. And this history is all complicated about who owns who and how these borders are all drawn up and who sold this land to somebody, this king, and all this kind of stuff. So it's really, really complicated. But the basic fact of the matter is this border with Ukraine is an extreme weakness to Russia. And people will say, well, if there's a war with like NATO, it's just going to be a nuclear war and it's going to end really quickly, and it doesn't matter that there's this border. Like, no, we don't know what the future of technology is going to hold. So maybe right now there's probably not going to be a war with Russia, and NATO and America isn't going to want to invade Russia. But give it 10, 20 years, and technology might come along that will make nuclear missiles redundant. They'll just be shot out of the air. So having this kind of weakness is what Russia calls an existential crisis for them. And this is a fact because, as Ukraine has been proving by attacking Russia, by bombing Russian cities across the border, and also by attacking certain Russian enclaves like Transnistria here, and now we're talking about Kaliningrad as well being demilitarized by the Polish people. So everything that Ukraine has done has basically justified, since the start of the war, has justified why Russia cannot afford for, first of all, NATO troops building up on this border. Ukraine having nuclear weapons, which they started to mention. If you look at the speech by Zelensky, and again, this is why this topic, I think, this argument of it's all Russia's fault for invading Ukraine really needs, I think, way more time. But I'm just like really scratching the surface here. So if you look at the speech by Zelensky, the one he did right before the war started, he mentioned how the nuclear proliferation agreement wasn't working, and all these kind of hints that Ukraine was thinking of getting nuclear weapons again. They were talking about getting Crimea back in a non-militaristic way, which, let's get into Crimea for a bit, because Crimea is Russia's only access to a warm water port to the Black Sea. It's their only access. And what a warm water port is, so this is the Sea of Azov, and this is the Sea of Azov during winter. So as you can see, this would be a problem if you want to do anything. Militarily, goddamn, I need to practice my English. I've been watching too many Russian videos, I think. So this is the Sea of Azov, and again, once it freezes over, it's kind of hard to get ships through. So that's the problem. So that's why you need a warm water port for trade, for military purposes, for all that kind of stuff. And that's what Crimea was. Russia actually has a military base here. So when Crimea was given to Ukraine, it wasn't just given willy-nilly. It had some caveats to it being part of Ukraine, right? So when Ukraine, say if Ukraine became radicalized, say if Ukraine had some sort of ideology that saw Russians as subhuman, as orcs, and wanted to, wipe them off the face of the earth, and started saying things like this. Let's say that's what happened to Ukraine, and they overthrew a government that was more friendly to them and started being friendly to NATO and America. And as I said, people who think NATO and America isn't a threat to Russia are just completely ignorant of the last 20 plus years, or even more than that, of America and NATO countries invading other countries. So or the other thing is, again, this is why there's so much more to this, is if I'm gonna play this clip, and I think I'll leave this video at that, because you can go on and on and on, but hopefully you're starting to get some semblance of the whole complexity of it. And every one of these issues, like just the issue of Crimea alone, can be talked about for an hour or two. And I highly recommend, there's probably better videos out there than the one I'm making to explain these topics to you. But Russia cannot give up Crimea, no matter what. Attacking Crimea is like attacking Moscow. So this is why this war is not gonna end, right? Especially, if anything, this war starting is solidified the reasons why Russia needs to keep it going. But I just wanted to play this quick clip, and this is getting into this divide that's happening, that was always in Ukraine. And you see it now. I think the Azov wives have come out, and they're talking about how the Ukrainian government and traders in the Ukrainian government have betrayed them. You see a few different you see the defense minister being swapped over by Zelensky now, and all these things I'm talking about, how the fascists there are looking to take control, is coming to fruition. Now, this video is something that I had to look up to make sure that it was real. I wanted to make sure, because I had to make sure this wasn't part of Zelensky's TV show or something like that, because it's so ridiculous. But this is him discussing things. He's going out to meet some of the fighters, and there's another documentary that you can check out by Vice. I think it's called The Rebels in Ukraine, or if you look up Rebels in Ukraine or something like that, I'll link it down in the comments, and I recommend you check that documentary out. But here's
обсудить и формализировать, чтобы потом не было как у Петра Алексеевича.
Ты со мной хочешь формализировать отношения?
Now, I find this video funny because now Zelensky here, he's surrounded by security and military and stuff like that, and he's just putting on this really deep accent and scary, and he's trying to look, oh my god, it's just ridiculous to me. But he's trying to look tough, and this guy is not taking him. This guy is just laughing at him, and I'm also laughing at him because he's an actor. But let's.
В меморандуме.
Я с тобой?
Не я с вами, а все люди, которые в этом процессе, те, которым болит за Украину.
Как капитуляция, прошу так.
Формализация.
Я пришел, тебе сказал, вы оружие вывезете, а ты меня...
So what he's talking about is he's telling the fighters on the border of the separatist states, and this is what this war actually comes out. Totally didn't mention this. So much to talk about. But this is what the argument comes down to: is there's been a war in Russia for the last in Ukraine for the last 8 years. So Russia has already been in Ukraine for the last 8 years. So Russia has already invaded Ukraine for all intensive purposes. So this justification of Russia invading Ukraine, you're actually basing it on whether Russia is justified in defending the separatists and Crimea, and whether Ukraine is justified in taking Crimea, taking the separatist areas over, and guess eventually maybe even getting nuclear weapons and having NATO on the border of Russia. So that's really the argument you're making, is that if you think that all those things are justified, and I'm not saying that they aren't, there is this definitely there is this thing to be said that if you are a sovereign nation, you should do whatever the hell you want. But realistically, that's not gonna it's gonna end up in being in a war, right? Like Taiwan, if Taiwan wanted to have nuclear weapons and point them at China in a very ideological world, that should happen. But if it actually does that or plans to do that, there's going to be a war with China. Like it's almost guaranteed. So maybe some concessions should be made, because these are very complicated issues, and not just a simple thing like Russia, sovereign nations, and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, let's
переводишь стрелки.
Так я вам второй момент уже озвучу. Я вас услышал, вы
Смотри,
сказали.
ты мне вообще не можешь никакие ультиматумы озвучивать, Денис, ты не понял.
Так я вам ультиматум, я говорю, это были люди.
Нам за эти
говорили.
оружие забрать? Или
При чем здесь?
Я
Я
не
вам говорю
понимаю,
за
чем мы
второй
закончим
момент.
сейчас разговор.
Так мы нормально общаемся,
Ну
нормально
так и давай нормально общаться.
Ну, никто же вас не пытается макнуть
Ни
никуда.
что.
Вам передали то, что происходило в Украине, и то, что люди
Кто
еще
мне
по
передал?
Украине.
Я же тебе говорю, ты мне скажи,
Так
кто?
я вам говорю, по Украине были акции.
Денис, по Украине вчера прошел дождь, вот что я слышу.
Ну, так я вам рассказываю о том, что
где
происходило.
акции? Кто мне что передал? Говорю, давай, что
Так
ты?
вот я вам и говорю, что люди хотят встречи с вами,
Какие люди? Денис,
которые
фамилию.
вышли на мероприятие под
Фамилию ты можешь мне сказать или нет? Ты что ты все
Ну
время...
хотите,
везде-
Плеханов, Кухарчук, ну это по разным областям.
Ну,
Дроздов
Денис,
и
это же так не
дальше.
делается.
Ну так так
Не,
спросили,
еще,
я
подожди,
передал.
вышел Стадников Николай
Да.
Вечеров,
Ну,
вышел,
наш губернатор.
передал
Сталин,
письмо, да, или
Ну,
что вы ему там,
передать
вернее, вы
президенту.
ему передали.
Передали
Конечно,
письмо?
для президента.
Ну, а мне передаст,
Вот.
я прочитаю.
Ну,
пацан.
так вы же спросили, что там было. Я вам и рассказываю, что, собственно, в этом
Денис,
письме. Вы же
ладно,
сами спросили
Денис,
только что.
послушай,
Да,
я президент этой страны.
конечно.
Мне 42.
And what was the saying in the Game of Thrones? If you have to tell anybody that you're a king, you're not really a king. So the video doesn't go for much longer, but the point I want to make with this clip is to show you just how divided Ukraine actually is, and how the Ukrainian government doesn't have control of the fascists, the mercenaries, whoever it is. And if you look at the clip by Vice, they even said that if the Ukrainian army, now this was a while back, but they even said that if the Ukrainian army tries to attack them, they will basically destroy the Ukrainian army. And this is the power that these nationalists have. So anyone that's saying that it's only a small amount of the population and all this kind of stuff, yes, it's a small amount of the population. It's not that small. It's probably about, I'd say, 10% of Ukraine, which is quite significant. But they are the most well-equipped, experienced, and brutal fighters out there. And it's like, say, even Afghanistan or other countries. You know, you have the overwhelming majority of people might not actually be, you know, terrorists or whatever you want to call them, or militants, but they are probably apathetic to the militants having control. They might agree with a lot of the things the militants there say, or they just don't want to risk their lives and are threatened by the militants there, and they just want to get on with their lives and let them run the show. And this is in essence what's happening in Ukraine. What's happened in Ukraine is that the radicals have taken control of the country, and I believe now more than ever. And if it hasn't happened officially, it's gonna happen. You just watch what happens once this whole pretense of the EU and NATO falls by the wayside. Once they get all the weapons out of America and Europe that they can, just see what happens to the government there, and see what happens to Poland. Just mark my words. See what happens soon, quite soon, once Russia isn't considered a threat anymore. So once that war is done, you're gonna see all of this come to light. What's happening here, and it's already kind of like bubbling up to the surface right now, because the nationalists aren't gonna put up with all this refugees and this gay rights and all this kind of stuff. Like they're tolerating this right now, but this is only a temporary thing that they're tolerating. Trust me, this is not gonna continue. So I hope I hope I did this topic justice, but there's just so much more to it, and I'm sure I've missed stuff that people are gonna question me about. But I'm gonna leave it at this for now, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from me talking, and thank you for all the support of the people who watch my stuff and managed to get through it all the way. I'll try doing my best, and keep putting reasonably watchable content out. So thanks guys, and all the best. See you.